Good evening, everybody. Hello and welcome to this event tonight, which is our final webinar in the three-part series, Navigating Your Nursing Career from Graduation to Employment. The earlier webinars have been recorded, as tonight's session will be recorded too. If you couldn't join any of the earlier events, I would encourage you to go and watch them at a later date. And also, please do take the chance to catch up on this webinar if you wish to watch it again. So we hope that you enjoy tonight's webinar. My name is Caroline Stephen. I am Professional Lead Education England. I am a registered adult health nurse and I have been working in nursing a long time. I've been in NHS services over 11 years, and then I came to the RCN in 2018, and I've now been obviously working with the Royal College of Nursing since then, starting with the RCN in Scotland, and then now I work with the UK team. I have a background in older people's care and also in manual handling. I was a manual handling advisor for some time. And then latterly, before joining the Royal College of Nursing, I worked in patient safety, quality improvement and clinical governance. So that's a bit of background about me. And I'm also joined tonight by Leanne Ford, who is Head of Nursing at Exemplar Healthcare, as well as being ably aided by Rob, our AV support here at the RCN. So just to give you a bit of background about Leanne, Leanne is a registered mental health nurse who started her career in acute psychiatric inpatient settings with working age adults, then moved on to support older adults in a therapy and recovery role. She made the move to social care 12 years ago and has had a fantastic development opportunities, training and exposure to a very different style of nursing, which she has absolutely loved. Her words. She has worked through a variety of nursing roles within Exemplar Healthcare across several different services as a registered nurse, unit manager and clinical nurse manager, and eventually moving into quality roles before her current role as head of nursing. So we're very grateful to have you, Leanne. You're incredibly passionate within your role and about the exposure to and experience within social care sector and the opportunity for people to pursue careers within this area of nursing. And you feel that there is a need for more recognition in the sector and for the ways in which people work within social care and the challenges you face and the rewarding outcomes that you strive to and do achieve, which I couldn't agree more. So it's a pleasure to have you here with us. And I'm hoping that the information shared tonight will be useful to all. So although we obviously, with your social care background, that's amazing, fantastic. But obviously interviewing, acing your interview, expert tips, wherever you are or wherever you're applying for jobs, we hope that obviously the content of tonight will be useful, and I'm sure it will. So Leanne and I are looking forward to this evening, and we have hopefully have some valuable conversation with you. So please do use the chat function. You're not automatically able to unmute yourself to ask any questions. So I would encourage you to use the chat function to engage in the conversation. If you'd like to ask a question, please do. It would be a very long evening if it's just Leanne and I talking to you. So use the Q&A function as well to ask all your questions while you're here. And if you do want to unmute and have an opportunity to ask your question in person rather than using the Q&A function, that's absolutely fine. If you could just make sure that you use the raise hand function, then Rob will be able to see that on the screen and he will be able to invite you and able to bring you on screen. So that is an opportunity if that's how you would prefer to ask questions. I think how Leanne and I will prefer to work is that if you do have questions, where possible, I'll try and probably just pose them throughout the webinar if I can, and I'll try and keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A throughout that. But certainly we'll definitely have a chance to answer the questions, as many as we can. I guess it depends how lots of questions we get, but we will certainly try and get through as many questions and comments as we can this evening for this 1 hour session that we are together. So without further ado, Rob, would you mind moving on to the next slide, please? So the aim of this session, as you can see here on the slide, is ultimately to help you to understand the interview process, learn how to prepare effectively, and trying to give you some tips for answering common interview questions. And we will introduce you to the STAR method, which some of you may be familiar with and some of you may not. And hopefully what we're aiming for is that we can help to build your confidence and your professionalism ready for the interviews that you will be starting to already, perhaps, or certainly if you're not already started to get interviews, you soon will be if you're at the end of your student journey and you're coming towards that. You will be starting to think about jobs where you would like to apply and starting to think about how to prepare for those interviews. There's no guarantees with any interviews. When you go for an interview, I'm sure Leanne and I both have been to interviews where we have been successful and interviews where we have not been successful. And I'm sure Leanne will say the same, but certainly what I've really learned as I've gone through the journey is that every opportunity is a learning opportunity, and trying to take that as a learning opportunity. So even when perhaps the interview doesn't quite go the way that you had hoped or anticipated, it's trying to get feedback from that and using that to help you develop and learn for the next time and the next interview that you will have. And equally, we'll give you some tips for answering some common interview questions, but we don't know what they'll ask specifically. So again, sometimes that can be a stumbling block. People feel like, well, how can I prepare if I don't know what I'm going to be asked? But we'll talk you through that, and we'll take you through that on tonight's webinar, how you can start thinking in a way and preparing in a way that will hopefully help you for that going forward. So I think if we're all good, I'll move on to the next slide, and I'll invite Leanne to come forward and take you onto the next slide. So thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Caroline. Good evening, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And thank you to the RCN for inviting me to come and talk to you all. So I just want to say, as Caroline has already introduced me, the majority of my career in the last 12 years have been in the private, independent and voluntary sector in adult social care. So I currently work for a complex care provider for adults over the age of 18. However, we are going to talk about points today more generally. So this could apply, like Caroline rightfully said, to across all areas of nursing, because as we know, that's very, very vast, and some of you might be feeling really confused at the minute as to where your heart kind of lies or what kind of route that you would want to take with that. So we are just going to start with looking at understanding the interview process, and first of all about different types of interview and what you can expect from that. So looking at the types of interview that you can be offered, particularly post-COVID. Now our post-COVID world looks very different, and we kind of moved into this really rapidly into this digital kind of way of doing things. So there might be some requests that are made towards you prior to interview. So there might be certain things that organisations would request, things like, could be as simple as like CVs. It could be things like knowledge or skills checklists. It could be looking at things like questions around care planning, medication management, or that could potentially come later as part of that interview process as well. When we look at the nature of the interview, we know that you could be invited into that service to do that face-to-face. We also, from experience again, sometimes they like to bring people in initially to have a bit of an informal chat, to give the context around the role. What does the role look like, just to ensure that actually, or that might even be in the form of a telephone conversation. Does this role sound as was expected? Is this role right for you? And actually, are you the right candidate for us also? So depending on where you are, this will really vary what that looks like. And especially within our organisation, it does vary depending on the roles as well. So the more senior senior roles, we tend to have more stages of interview. So just for future reference, that might be something that you come across in the future. We also know that you can do virtual interviews. So, again, it's to be prepared for this. Many a times I've done interviews and, it can't always be helped, but just maybe give a bit of a pre-warning. We've done interviews in the past where people may have been at work and there's some distractions, but it's always ideal if you can kind of ensure that the distractions are as limited as possible. You've got a good Wi-Fi, you're able to access the link prior to the interview, just to ensure that everything runs smoothly, because there's nothing worse when you're already a little bit anxious or panicking to get online, or trying to figure out technology. That's the worst thing that could definitely happen. You could potentially expect a panel, so there might be a variety of people in that interview, such as senior nursing managers, care managers, ward sisters, ward managers, but also expect, again, coming back to my own experience and in the organisation I currently work in, our service user population are very heavily involved in things like interviewing as well, because they represent the wider population that kind of live across our services. So we have service user councils, and sometimes they will be involved in that interview and will have some absolutely brilliant questions to throw your way, which might be a little bit of a curveball sometimes, but just to ensure that obviously you engage with everybody in that room and you embrace that experience, depending on who it is that's interviewing. So if we look at typical stages of interviews then, again, this will vary depending on where you are. One thing that I would always recommend and suggest, again from experience, is I would always like to do an informal meet or have a bit of a walk around that kind of organisation, that unit, that service, that home, that ward, if that is possible. And again, we know that might not always be possible depending on how that organisation approaches that, just to get a feel for the environment. Sometimes, which I'm sure you'll experience throughout your career, you may go into a role or into an organisation that may have come across as in a certain way in interview, and when you get there, it's not maybe as it was discussed, if that makes sense. Nursing is a very broad. There's a lot of places that you can be recruited into, a lot of variety, but there's also peaks and troughs, and things go well sometimes and things don't go so well sometimes. So, it is good to get a feel for that and to kind of talk to that manager or talk to that ward manager or whoever that might be, and have a look around that environment to make sure it is the right move for you. When we look at shortlisting as well, so we will review candidates usually. We will look at things like application forms, what is the detail in there, things like spelling mistakes, really simple things that can be easily avoided if you just kind of put that time and attention into it. So I would say definitely invest in that work history, experience, understanding of what have you done previously. Please remember that your experience as students is so important as part of that. So obviously it is your first job, but what have you experienced as a student and probably prior to or alongside that as well. So that shortlisting phase is really, really important. And then I would always actively encourage you to send a CV over as well. Again, that's going to kind of draw the employer in. So when they're reviewing that, they might see different things that they, that really pique their interest that they might not see through that application process, depending on how that organisation does that. Then you can expect to be invited to the interview. So that depends really on that organisation's availability. We tend to do interviews quite sporadically. So whenever the service can fit that in and it's good for the candidate. But I know in some areas they do block out specific days for interview and they offer you certain times and dates, and that's kind of when they see all of their candidates, and that's then closed. So it's important to, I suppose, expect a level of flexibility there as well. There may be a follow-up or a second stage, and as I discussed in the first point, there may be other things that you would be expected to do on that day. So it might be worth asking, is there anything I need to bring? Is there anything I need to prepare for? We do skills checklists, and we do like care plan activities and things like that, just to see what people's knowledge and understanding and experience and skill set is around certain areas that's relevant to our service. So you may just want to check that out so you can go prepared. You can leave enough time for that process, depending on how long that would take. And then just any potential additional requirements that you would need to make people aware of to be able to, successfully engage in that interview or attend that interview. Just ensure that you let them know so that runs smoothly. And then other than that, really, if you speak to that employer, hopefully they will give you a time frame on when you should hear back regarding that interview if they've got other candidates. And then we move on to the kind of DBS references and all that kind of thing. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So preparation is really key. And when we look at how to prepare for interviews, the first point for me is so important that you have researched that employer. Again, it comes back to the fact that you really do want to ensure that this is the right role for you, but also that employer will be wanting to kind of mirror that you are the right fit for them, that you fit into their current team, that you've got the right skills, the right experience, and so on and so forth. Definitely do your research. A lot of organisations or trusts or whatnot will have websites, which we certainly do. It talks about the kind of care that we offer. It looks at the service users that we cater for between our services. It looks at our kind of reputation and all that kind of thing. Another thing that I would suggest definitely is that you look at things like the CQC report or CQC inspection for that service so that you're prepared, you understand where that service is at or that ward, whatever that might look like, hospice and so on. And you can kind of talk about the day-to-day responsibilities. You will have an understanding of that from that report, what is expected of you. And also if for example, in the last report they came out as requires improvement in safe due to medications management, you can show an interest in that and say, is there any challenges that you would need to make me aware of so that I was prepared, or is there any kind of improvement in that meds process because I've got experience of this from previous roles or whatever that might look like. So that's always a really, really good thing to do. Always look at kind of values, ethos of that organisation or that trust. Do they align with your values? Is that something that you want to, this excites you and you think, yeah, this really aligns with how I want to work, the kind of nurse that I want to be? And again, we do ask questions about our values. Are you aware of them? Have you seen them on the website? So that's really, really important. Also, what is the expectation of you as an employee? So when we're looking at job descriptions, when we're looking at person specs, just ensuring that you match the relevant skills, experience and achievements to what that job description is asking for. Usually it will tell you if they are essential, but what I will say is don't hold back if you kind of meet a lot of them, but there's a couple that you're not quite there. Always inquire if it is something that you're really interested in, because a huge part of interviewing, from my experience, is really around people's nature and personality and their compassion and the kind of their personality. We can always train and teach people things, which myself, has been really relevant to myself throughout my career. When I came into social care, being an RMN, I have had a lot of exposure to physical health needs over the years, ventilation, catheterisation, PEG, but it's things that I've worked towards. So there's always new skills. Again, nursing is so vast. There's so many areas and specialities. You aren't always going to know everything. But if you go in there with the right attitude and willing to learn, employers will generally, this is from my experience of interviewing people, will be willing to train people and develop people in the right direction. So just ensure that everything's as it needs to be, that you're happy with the role, that you're happy with the organisation, you're happy with their values and what they kind of require from you. And then when we're looking at the importance of mock interviews, you can do this peer-to-peer. There is so many organisations out there that offer incredible resources to support with things like this, like the RCN. A big one that we work with in social care is Skills for Care. So if anybody's ever heard of Skills for Care, if you go over there, they've also got some incredible resources. You've got this fancy new chat GPT thing that I'm trying to get a hang of, that everybody seems to be using. And if you type anything into there, it really does throw out literally anything that you could want to know. So you can always go online, get a feel for the kind of questions that will be being asked. Depending on where you are going, these may vary because in different areas, for example, my experience in the NHS was very, very different on that kind of health medical side to social care. So in social care, care is planned and delivered in a person-centered way, so based on people's needs and risks. Um, so the questions may vary, but generally you are going to look at common themes around talk to me about your experience, tell me about yourself, which is so important to sell yourself. That comes a little bit further on, so we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. Why do you want to work here? What do you know about us as a trust or an organisation, or what do you understand around what we do? Looking at your strengths, your weaknesses, your ability to work as a team, your clinical skills, experience and knowledge. And then there's always something generally scenario based. So, again, it might be very specific to that area if you're applying for a cardiology role, but with us, it's generally like around emergency situations. How would you respond if you saw evidence of abuse? What would you do about that? All that kind of thing. So looking at emergency management, escalation, incident reporting, safeguarding. And the most recent one is use of digital tech and IT skills. That seems to come into it as well. So do be prepared for that, because that is just the way of the world now. And if it's not already in the area that you've applied to work, it most definitely will be in the near future. So yeah, back over to you, Caroline.
Great, thank you, Leanne. And I think before we move on, we have actually got a question in. So if you don't mind, I'll maybe just ask that just now, Leanne, from your experience. So we have Gemma asking, how and when do I disclose a disability or health condition, especially one that has an impact on the job, e.g., I can't work night shifts?
I would there may be something to do with that on the application form potentially, and if there is, always be upfront and honest. I think the main thing that will come from this webinar today is always being open, transparent and honest about everything. So that's down to disability, that's down to shift flexibility due to children and all that, because once you've gone through that process and you're in that role, it is very difficult then if things haven't been declared at interview. So I would probably be ringing up prior if it's not on the application form and just saying, I'm really interested in this role, but please can I make you aware of this, and these are the reasonable adjustments that I will need to A, attend the interview, or B, like moving forward as a colleague. And then generally we will get a snapshot of it either in the application or in that initial discussion or meet, but then we will discuss it in further detail at interview. So I would always encourage you to be open and honest as early as possible with that one.
Yeah. Great, thank you, Leanne, and I hope that's answered your question there, Gemma. So yes, great, thank you. Okay, so we're just moving into that section around these common interview questions and how to answer them. And again, as I said at the beginning, and if you weren't here, you would have heard it, but it can be difficult to know what we're going to be asked. But Leanne's given some hints and tips there already, starting to think about scenarios, emergency situations. What would you do if you were faced with, what actions would you take? Tell me about yourself and such like. So that is fantastic. All those things already. I mean, I remember, I'm sure you've been the same, Leanne, with notepads and taking some bullet points or mind map. I quite like a mind map. And I like to sort of think about, well, what are some of my skills? What are some of my weaknesses? And it's always hard to admit sometimes, but you do have to, it's really important that you start to think about those, because actually when you're thinking about weaknesses, you're actually thinking about them in terms of, these are areas for development, and I recognize that, so yeah, I like getting my notepad out and just having getting ideas and concepts and thoughts.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to say there, Caroline, that's a really great point. And I can't speak on behalf of all employers, but when people come to interviews in the past that I've led, or that I've been involved in, and they say, I've made some notes. Is it okay if I bring them in? I absolutely love that because it shows that they've actually took the time to sit and do that work. As long as they're not sitting like reading off it as a script, that would be a bit concerning. But if they've brought that in just to kind of jog their memory, we know people get anxious, and actually for me, in interviews, we should be making people trying to make people feel as relaxed as possible. We always talk about giving them additional time, asking to come back to a question, or just taking a minute if they need to, because you get the best out of people when they are relaxed. So I think that point about writing things down and brainstorming things that because we're not going to remember everything. I always love to see that in interviews that people have made notes.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
And
Sorry
I'm
to
sure,
interrupt
yes,
there.
no, and I think my brain's going on to it now as well, and we'll maybe come and touch on it later, but it is that fact of not being scared to take a deep breath before you
No.
answer, and
Hmm.
just take a moment and actually just ask for clarity. If you know, I know that my most recent interview for this post, which was a good couple of years ago now, I remember being asked a question, and I think it went in, got all jumbled up, and I
Hmm.
had no idea
Yeah.
what I had been asked. So I then actually just said, "Sorry, can you can you ask? I'm not sure that I'm clear on what you asked me there. Would you mind asking me that question again?" And it just gave me a moment. They asked the question again, and I thought, okay,
Yeah.
I've got what you've asked me now, and then I could answer. So it's those kind of things. But when you're new to interviews, it does feel that comes with experience as well. But this
Yeah.
is what we're here to say, that that's okay. So yeah, great,
Definitely.
thank you. So yeah, and when you start to think about interview questions and how to answer them, there are various ways and methods that you might use. You might have be familiar with different techniques, but certainly quite a common technique, particularly when preparing for sort of behavioural and situational interview questions, is the STAR technique. So if you could, yeah, thank you, Rob. He's preempted what I thought there. So this technique is ultimately, yeah, quite a helpful way to allow you to craft a kind of clear and concise response using using real life examples, and it's certainly a method that the RCN would recommend and encourage you to be familiar with. And when you're doing your preparations and you're thinking about maybe some examples that you've come across or situations that you've faced throughout your either as your student placements, or indeed maybe some of you have worked alongside being a student. So thinking about some scenarios, then start trying to think about, well, the STAR technique as you're doing your preparation, and that then allows you to get that kind of method into your head as well. So the STAR technique stands, if you wouldn't mind just moving through the one at a time, thank you. So situation is the first um uh, letter, a word, and it describes that. This is where you want to describe the context or the challenge that you've faced, and this is where you're going to share details about the relevant work situation or an academic project that you've been involved with, or volunteer work. So it's just outlining that situation in relation to whatever example it is that you are going to speak about. Then you would want to move on to the task. T for task. And that is ultimately where you're outlining your own responsibility or your role in the situation, and highlighting the goal or the task that you needed to undertake or conduct as part of that situation and as part of that example. And the other thing I think I'll take the opportunity to say here as well is often, obviously, we work in teams. And within nursing, a lot of the time we work in teams, and it's great to recognise that and acknowledge that, obviously, in an interview. But often the panel also want to hear specifically what your role was within that team as well. So working alongside the team, I did X, I saw what Y. They want to know what you did as part of that as well, not just we did. So just to be mindful about that. A is for action. So this is where you want to explain the specific actions that you took to address the situation or overcome the challenge that you faced. So focus on the most kind of impactful steps that you took. And even, as I've said already, even if it was part of a team effort, focus on the elements that what actions you took. So just to highlight that what your role was in that. And then R is result. So this is where you would want to discuss the outcomes of your actions and what you've learned from the experience, and emphasizing the main results and how the experience has made you then a stronger candidate as well for this post. And it's really important, just even if a situation, not all situations are going to be good, not all examples that you give will maybe want be positive examples. It maybe will be something that was a real challenge and actually you've had to work really, really hard. But actually, even if even if that is the case, then actually it's about demonstrating what you've learned from that now and what you would you be, how will you implement that learning going forward? If it's been a difficult and challenging situation, what did it teach you about yourself and perhaps any development that you have undertaken since and or recognize that you need to take going forward. So when using the STAR technique, just remember to use examples that work for you. And that could be work, home, or volunteering, or placements. Obviously, you wouldn't want to use too many from one specific example. So you wouldn't want to use too many home examples, for example, but actually depends on what you're being asked. That might be a really relevant response to the question because it tells them a bit more about you as an individual. I think I recall in the past being asked a question to tell me about myself and how I overcame challenges. Well, I actually studied my nursing as a single mum, so I had straight away had to talk about the fact that actually I had to prioritize, I had to do time management, I had to coordinate people and getting assignments in on time and the care and support for a young child at the time who when I started my nursing was 4.5. So there straight away you're showing some examples of how you actually as an individual are holding all your plates if you like and holding all those spinning plates, and that wasn't a specific work example. Do keep your examples short and to the point. Interviews are not long generally, and we certainly don't want to get caught too long in one specific example. Try to get your points across in a conversational way where you can, so it's not to appear too rehearsed, although we actively encourage you to practice and prepare. Yeah, you don't want to maybe sound like you're being too, like Leanne had said earlier, almost like you're reading off a script. That's not ideal either. And be prepared to answer follow-up questions as well if on the examples that you give. So some preparation tips just around the STAR technique. Well, I think we've maybe moved on to the next slide, but that's okay. Think about it. Write down various situations and examples from your education and work experience and the strengths. As Leanne said already, go through the job description, think about the skills, be aware of what you're doing and rehearse your answers. And I'm sure, and by following that sort of STAR technique as well, you'll be well prepared to showcase your skills and experiences effectively. So yeah, over to you, Leanne. Let me there's a wee bit in the chat.
Yeah, there's a really good question in the chat.
Perfect. So if you were asked a question that you didn't have a clinical example of, such as identifying abuse, would it be okay to use the STAR method in a hypothetical sense, as in what you would do? Yes, because if you haven't experienced it, then you can't answer what you did. But what I would be clear about, I'm sure Leanne will agree with that, is I would be clear, well, I haven't actually faced that scenario. in my student experience specifically. But if I was faced with that scenario, this is how I think I would approach that. And I would work through the STAR method, and I would tell them in the situation, this is what I would do. And then I would, I'd look, you might not get every little bit of the STAR in that sense, because you've not necessarily got a result, but what you would then say is what I would do to follow up or whatever. So absolutely, you can still use the STAR technique. I would just be making it clear that I haven't had the experience, but this is how I would approach that. And in fact, some of those questions that you will be asked will be exactly that. There'll be questions of what would you do if, and the expectation is they don't think you will have had that experience. They just want to know. They're really assessing and thinking about, do you think about risk assessment? Are you thinking, thinking about who you need to get involved? Are you thinking about recognizing your limitations that you need to seek and get escalate reporting it? Are you thinking about, well, I would need to then report that on the reporting system so that we had, that is ultimately what they're assessing. So thank you.
I think there's another one.
So yeah, there's coming in. I think I'm just
That's
now
great.
Do you highlight the skills like time management, etc., or would you, how would you say to the interviewer, would you be able to work out that you're talking about time management? Well, I guess, Leanne, sorry, do you want to take that?
No, yep. Sorry, it's time management is key in our roles. But if it's absolutely essential as a skill, but it is all about prioritizing tasks. So it's not necessarily that you will kind of box off certain times, depending on where you work, obviously, but usually from, again, experience, like I'll do this at 10, I'll do this at 11. In an ideal world, that would be beautiful, but it doesn't really ever work out like that. So absolutely, yeah, definitely talk about time management skills, but prioritizing tasks as well and delegation.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Thank you for that. Hopefully that answers that. And you might mention it, Liz, like, well, I feel like I've got good time management because an example would be, or you might just give the example, and in giving the example, you're demonstrating that obviously I had to prioritize, etc.
And yeah. Sometimes as well, we're not always entirely in control of that either. So if you have like an incident on your unit and then the whole day goes haywire, but again, it's about priority. So you will deal with that emergency. You may be a little bit late with meds, and then you may end up going over on shift and having to hand over a little bit late. But it kind of, you just do what you can do with the resource that you've got at the time, just using that time as effectively as possible. So yeah.
Okay, so there's some questions in the chat, but I think I'm going to actually let you move on and come back to those questions. Okay, Leanne?
Yeah, sure.
That's all right, because I think they're good questions to come back to.
Lovely.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay. Oh no, sorry, it was the one back, wasn't it? I'm so really sorry, Rob. It was the one before. Thank you. So common interview questions and how we answer them. So as we've already discussed, that prep is really key. And I know we're talking about this specific to nursing. So depending on your speciality, if you're an RGN, an RMN, or an LD, and where you're applying for that role. So looking at, like we've already said, the ward, the CQC report, the values, what that kind of environment entails, the people that you're looking after. Then if there's any kind of specific conditions, diagnosis, illness, risk, if there's anything that's relevant to that. So, for example, the Mental Health Act, the Mental Capacity Act, deprivation of liberty safeguards, all that kind of thing. So just do your reading. Please, 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 I cannot stress this enough. Bear in mind that it is impossible for you to know everything. Yeah, especially coming fresh out of school. You've had the experience in the different areas, but none of us know everything. I certainly don't know everything. Caroline certainly doesn't know everything. And that is okay. That is part of our profession. So over the years, even as a senior nursing manager, there's things that I've come across, and I'll say, I've never heard of that before, but like, let's get some training, let's have a look at it. And we would absolutely expect you to be doing that as nurses, because based on our like responsibilities, our competencies, and our accountability under the code and under the standards of proficiency, we are allowed to say, I am not sure about that, or I have never come across that, because we're not subject matter experts in everything. Okay. So, what I would always say to you, absolutely prepare. But if you go into an interview and you are asked a question that you do not know the answer to, do not panic about that. Just say, as Caroline said previously, I haven't had any direct experience of that, or that's not actually something that I've come across or that I'm aware of. However, I would like to try and answer it, or I am more than willing to kind of do training in that area and really embrace the things that are offered to you, Um, people will quite often, like I've already said, of my experience being in adult social care, because we look after people with multiple complexities, has been absolutely phenomenal for my physical health knowledge around the things that I've already talked about. But absolutely embrace that, because that's the way that we look after people in a person-centered way. So don't be fearful just because it's not kind of your speciality. If new things come along, absolutely embrace them, and vocalize that willingness to embrace things and to learn and to develop and progress and expand your knowledge and your skills within that interview, as part of maybe not being able to answer that question, if that makes sense. Um, so draw on your experience from your training, anything that you've come across. Some of you may have worked as HCAs, or NAs, or whatever it might be previous. And again, like Carolyn said, all of that, even life experience, it's so relevant. When people have looked after grandparents or parents that have become unwell, or that have been on end of life pathways, or whatever that looks like. Some people, we've had children who've had disabilities that have looked after children. That is all so relevant and so important to bring into that interview if you haven't had that kind of experience through that nurse training. Um, there's For me, there is a huge emphasis on people's character, their personality, their compassion, their nature, and I think it's so important to sell yourself in that way. So to just be yourself, try and relax. And I know it's easier said than done, but for me, it's just so lovely seeing these personalities come through an interview, and you just think, do you know what? They didn't score in these areas, but what a cracking interview that was, and what a lovely person, and what a brilliant nature, and really great like ethos and values and way they want to approach that role. So actually, we can work on these couple of things. We can train this person through this. Um, and with weaknesses, I always say to people, we have this question in one of our in our interviews, and it's actually written as weaknesses, but I always like to say areas for development. So where you maybe not so strong, which is fine again, because we're not all good at everything. Always try and answer that question, because we're not all good at everything. So it might be that you've had some experience to it, but you don't actually feel that competent, or you don't feel that confident in that area. And actually, you often seek support from colleagues. So if there's a little bit of extra training or development, then you would absolutely embrace that and jump on board with it. Um, and even through supervision, even through things like mentorship, buddying, working with whatever that might be, just be really open and honest about that. I know we really struggle to sell our strengths, okay, but you've all chose this career path for a reason, okay, because you care, and that ultimately that is why you would come into the profession. You've got to have strengths, even if it is your compassion, even if it is your drive, your will for people to receive good care, whatever that might look like. Absolutely sell that, because you deserve to. Stephen, that question is coming. I promise. I've just seen it flash up. So that is on one of the next slides. So yeah, we'll be coming to that shortly. Um, and just be confident, and actually show some kind of pride in those strengths as well, because we all know what it involves to train over those 3 years. It's not easy. It's a real graft. You've spent hours and hours and hours and hours out there with people's loved ones, supporting teams in nursing homes, on wards and whatnot. So be really confident and proud about the strengths that you've got, and the achievements that you've gained and experience from that journey. And also bring into it other people's feedback. So if you've had, I don't know, somebody give you a compliment, or give you really good feedback, or really, from a relative or a family member or a service user or patient. That's the best feedback that you can receive. Or you've had some really great feedback around teamwork or specific to a question that they ask. Absolutely throw that in there as well. And just be willing to embrace new experiences. And yeah, I think that's pretty much covered, unless you've got anything else, Caroline, you want to add to that? No? Next slide, please. So confidence does come over time. And I know it's very easy for us to sit here and say, be confident, go in there and really, but that for me isn't necessarily around experience and knowledge at this point. It's about you doing the right thing and being good enough for that role. Okay, so that you'll go in with good intentions, that you've got your pin, that you're upholding the code, that you're professional, that you're compassionate, and so on. So again, easier said than done. And over time, it will take time for you to build your confidence in that decision making and that delegation and that, am I doing the right thing? But please always, when, like we talked about previously, when you are going out there and seeking employment, it's so important with employers to ensure and check that they offer things like a good preceptorship program, or that you're going to get a good induction period and you're not just thrown in at the deep end, given the keys and left to get on to your own devices. Okay, so these are the kind of questions that you need to be asking. What is the support? Will I get regular supervision? And I'm kind of jumping ahead to preparing questions for the panel there, but these things are really, really key. And the benefits to you as a colleague, because that is really important as well. There is a really big emphasis for the first time in and I'm not saying it's never been there, it absolutely has, but there is a really big focus on well-being of nurses now, and that actually we can't look after anybody else if we're not looking after ourselves. So these benefits like mental health first aiders, counselling, all these kind of little perks, like I know this sounds really silly, but even like cost of living support through like vouchers to get money off your food shops and all things like that, it all contributes to us looking after ourselves, and that's really, really important. So we'll come back to preparing questions for the panel, but that they are a couple of things that you do need to consider. Positive body language, being really open, not really tense and crossing arms and like being quite standoffish, just really open, really trying to relax, really open with your kind of body language when you're talking, your expressions, that you're engaged, that you are maintaining eye contact with people in the room when you're talking to them. That's just kind of like respectful thing to do, I suppose, and to show that you are listening and you're engaging in the conversation that's going on. For me, I think professional attire really does, it really says a lot about a person and a person's commitment to that interview. We understand that sometimes people might come in uniforms if not ideal, but if they've come from like work or anything like that, which obviously you would explain at the interview, but always just make sure that you present yourself well. What is what I'm saying? It's not about being fashionable but just not turning up in jeans and like not. So it's like there's no effort that's gone into this. Like we've already talked about throughout the rest of the presentation, you're going in there to sell yourself. There might be 5 nurses applying for this one role, but actually when people really make that effort, they prepare, they've done their research, they're really engaged in the interview, they've really made an effort to look smart. Because ultimately you're going to be being recruited or want to be recruited into this organisation who you will be representing when you are on that ward, like in front of patients, funders, the Care Quality Commission, the local authority, health and safety, all that. You are the face of that business, which ultimately they are if we kind of strip it back. So yeah, please always make that effort. And if you can't, for whatever reason, your car breaks down and then you get all oily or you end up in your uniform, just be honest about it and just say, look, I'm really sorry. I would have, I'd worn something different, but I just wanted to let you know that I apologise. I have had to come from work or whatever that might look like. So I think your clear, confident communication, just be yourself. That I think it's really important. Don't try and create a narrative of something that isn't a true reality. Don't try and pretend that you know things that you don't. Be open and honest, and you will feel more relaxed if you're not trying to create these scenarios or find this information or find these words and you're tumbling over yourself and tying yourself in knots. I'd say be confident where you've got so far, like look at the journey that you've come on, and you really need to give yourself some respect and a real pat on the back for that, because it is a real journey. And if you can get through something like that over the last 3 years, going into all these different environments, meeting all these different people, making all these patients and residents feel incredible, this is just the next step. It's another string to your bow. Okay. So you have got just be, if you want that time, like we've already said as well, a good interviewer for me would like explain that to you. If you want a minute, do you want a drink of water? If you want me to repeat the question, just stop and just say, can I just have a bit of a minute? Or I just want to have a think, and just calm yourself down, have a little bit of a breather, clear your head, and then pick, can you repeat the question again? Sorry about that, and then just carry that on. Okay. So there's no rush. To kind of get everything out as quick as you can. I know sometimes we want to, because we have a bit of a brain freeze, but the more you get into that conversation and the more relaxed that you feel, the better you will do in that interview. So just be confident in your own skills, your own knowledge, and what you've achieved so far. Preparing questions, always ask questions, guys, always. Even if you can't think it, just think of things before you go, that you might want to ask about the CQC report, about the organisation, about, even if it's just, can I have a look around? Do you mind if I have a look around, please? Or you might say, I did have a couple of questions, but actually as the interview's gone through, you've kind of answered them already, so thank you for that. So always identify if they've answered the questions. And yeah, just ask about opportunities for development, support. What is there any room for like progression throughout the organisation, and would there be opportunity to train? And is there any challenges that they're facing at the minute? Have they got a stable, anything at all? There's so many questions that you could ask, but definitely do pop some down. Okay, back over to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Leanne. And I think just to point, if we could just go back to that slide a moment, Rob, just to add around that professional attire, I think as well, because we obviously had that just making that effort, and we spoke about different types of interviews earlier, and you'd
Yeah.
mentioned about potentially digital interviews as well.
Hmm.
Prepare as if you were in person as well.
Yeah.
So, you still would want to dress smart. You would still want to make the effort to look like you've dressed and prepared appropriately, whether it's online, like we are sitting in this box, or whether it's at your face to face. And partly that's because obviously you can still be seen on screen, but also it's about getting you into the zone of, I'm going for an interview and I'm having my interview now as well. So actually some of that kind of getting into that professional attire, putting even the shoes, even if you're not going to see my shoes, I've got my shoes on and I know that I'm ready and I'm prepared for it. So that, it gets you in the zone as well, doesn't it, Leanne? It helps you as
Absolutely.
an
And I think
individual.
Stephen's asked in the chat what is appropriate to
Yeah,
wear. So it would be anything smart, really, that you would consider smart. So, a pair of trousers, a shirt, a tie and a jacket if you want to, a blouse for ladies, some trousers, a skirt, whatever you feel comfortable in, but just something that says, I've really made a bit of an effort today to come to this
yeah.
interview, and I really want this. Um, do you want
Okay.
me to read the other one? Sorry, there's another one, Bethany.
Yeah, and I was just going to say we might take those questions now as well. Actually, it might be quite a good time to take the other questions. So
Do
the
interviewers
yeah,
look for keywords, jargon? Um, I wouldn't personally mark if somebody was, and this is again my own personal view. I can't really speak for the NHS if there's kind of like buzzwords that have to come through, or the points, but I wouldn't necessarily mark somebody down if they were on the right track and they knew exactly what they were talking about, but just couldn't get a specific word, if that makes sense. So if I know what you're alluding to and you've got an understanding and you've answered the question, we don't have specific words that you have to kind of get to get that mark. If does that make sense? But that may vary where you go, Bethany. I'm not sure.
yeah. I was going to say I think again it's one of those things about being confident in your answer. So actually, it may appear slightly simple, but if you're actually confident in what you're saying. It's clear and it's obvious that you understand what you're saying, rather than happen to throw in a buzzword or a jargon word, but it's actually quite evident you're not really quite clear what that is.
Hmm.
I think it's much more important that it's obvious that you know and you're confident with what you're talking about, than just sort of throwing in words that may or may not be helpful if you're not really clear
Hmm.
around that. The other thing as well, I think Stephen's asked here, is he's read that it's a good to ask interviewers at the end is if there is anything else they would like me to clarify, or is there something that I didn't quite answer? Would you recommend this or avoid?
I don't see any
I
harm
would
in that. I
recommend,
think
yeah,
that's,
yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah,
good. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
I asked that in my interview for this job as well. Is that if
Did you?
having gone through the interview process, is there any areas that you feel that I haven't covered, or that you think I would need to develop to be able to do this post that I
Hmm.
haven't already addressed? So
That, no, that's great. And
yeah,
always really chase feedback as well if you don't get a
yeah.
role. So sometimes they'll ring and say, "Oh, sorry, you weren't successful." Just ask for that feedback around, can you just give me a little bit more around why? Because I would really like to take that forward in the future. And that again, like Caroline said at the start, it's such a valid point. It is all experience. So you've got the experience of that interview under your belt, then you know how it feels, you got through it, you didn't get it, but actually this is the feedback you got, so we get ready and we go again. Yeah.
And I've just got another couple of quick questions I think that I'm going to pose to you just now before I just finish off with the RCN resources that are available.
Hmm.
Helen had asked, and I think you might have mentioned you use a point system as well, but can you elaborate on the point system, please? So Helen has had an interview, so although we won't speak specifically about her interview, and the feedback was good that she got, but she didn't score enough points. So where she had maybe got 2 to 3 points, they were looking for 4 to 5. And she was always saying just that she believed in quality over quantity. But I guess that's the point, that the scoring system is
Yeah.
reflective of how you meet that
Yeah.
criteria, isn't it? So you've been able to evidence, or you've partially met the requirement, or you've met the requirement fully, or maybe like a score of 4 could be, exceptional, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it is very much like that. So, for example, in one question, you might get like 3 points usually with ours. So, if I give you ours as an example, I do a lot more of the senior nursing roles now. So, you'll have to forgive me. Like, I've just got
yeah.
senior nursing role questions. But say an example would be if you suspected abuse was and poor culture was occurring in your service, what would you do about that? So, to get 3 points in that question, there's a variety of stages that you need to go through. So you would say, I need to ensure the safety of the service user. I would obviously notify safeguarding, do any like remove any staff, suspend, do training, report it to the local authority, report it to CQC. And then there's if they only said a couple of those points, it would be a one, which was like very briefly or didn't really answer the question in great detail. Then two is answered in reasonable detail, like you said, and then three would be exceeded like all points within the answer answered really, really well. So it might just be that there was, even though there's got to be something, even though the interview went well, there's got to be some areas that they felt that you didn't quite touch on, to not give you that full point scoring, which again is fine. It's all part of that learning experience, but I would probably have gone back to them and just say, can you just give me a little bit more information on what you were looking for in relation to that question so that you've got that for when you move forward again.
Great, thanks. Okay, I'm just going to quickly go through the last slides, and I'm conscious of time. We're now going to probably run over ever so slightly, so hopefully not by much. But ultimately, I just want to highlight that the RCN do have a career service, and they are available to help you in a variety of ways. You can get email support with applications, and they can give you feedback on your CV, helping you to write your CV, supporting statements as well, obviously, if it's an application that you've completed. So again, if you're an RCN member, you're able to then access these services through the Career Service. They also offer career coaching. So if you're maybe at a bit of a crossroads, you're a bit unsure about where it is or what you want to do, you could have that discussion with a career coach, and that might just help to give you a bit more clarity and think through your skills and think through where it is that you think you'd be best suited. And also there's support and help actually in answering questions, rehearsing answers, and getting that kind of constructive feedback around that. So again, using all these resources to help you prepare so that you feel ready and able to take on interviews, because particularly if it's first interviews, it is an anxious time, and we recognise that. Rob, if you could just move on to the next slide. So again, the sample interview questions are available on the internet. Sorry, I keep getting muddled up between intranet and internet. So again, there's a whole host of resources available on the RCN web pages for individuals who are members. It shows you there a bit more detail about the STAR technique, giving you some questions that you might think about for your interviews as well. So please do visit that. I have the link here for the Career Service page that I'm just going to pop in the chat just now, if I can get that going. Yeah, and Jeffrey, I've seen your question and I'm going to come to it. So just in a moment, thank you. And if we could just go to the last next page, just to highlight that the Career Service also had a webinar about interview skills that would hopefully complement this webinar tonight. So again, you might want to go to the RCN Careers webpage and access that interview skills webinar that will go into more detail as well, that can all be good preparation to hopefully ace these interviews that you're going to have. And I think that's us on to questions now. Absolutely. So I'm going to come back to that question, Jeffrey, that I haven't yet answered. So are there any red flags interviewers look for in responses that they should avoid?
I think it's for us, one of the most common things that we see, this is more for future reference, guys, but jumping around between roles is one for us. So we want a really stable nursing team. So when you see on somebody's CV, they've done like 3 months, 4 months, 3 months, 6 months, that's always a concern to me. I think the other one as well is language. Just be mindful of language. Sometimes if people aren't particularly experienced and they say, I'm trying to think, like things like we refer to risks and behaviour as concern, or behaviour of concern, or behaviour that challenges. Like an example would be in an interview says, oh, well, once I was with this resident who was kicking off. And it's that kind of, do you know, that kind of language, just be mindful that sometimes it can be quite old school, or it can be quite disrespectful. And if we continually get that, I know sometimes like some of us say the wrong things, and that's just us being human, but if that's an ongoing thing, I think that is a cause for concern for us. Yeah, but that's just a couple of ones that come just off the top of my head.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think if you have had moves, certainly, as you say, that can highlight a bit of a risk for you and your stable team. But again, sometimes you've got very good reason for those. Yeah. And again, it's just highlighting that, and actually sometimes being proactive and saying, you'll have noticed from my application that I've moved, or if I didn't have, and the reason for that is.
Yeah, so like relocation.
Relocation, exactly, or family commitment, or whatever it may be. Then sometimes it's just highlighting that. So hopefully, Jeffrey, and I'm sorry I made you wait till the end, but I did have it on my radar to answer you. So I hope that has been helpful. And I think. So Kaylee has also, Caroline, you mentioned at the start that the past webinars are available to watch. Do you know where you can find these? Good question, Kaylee. I thought they were available on our events page, but that's maybe not. So what I let me see quickly if I can find that in the background.
Just while you're looking before we
Yes,
sign off,
thank you.
I just want to say thank you so much for, and I'm not going to sign off yet, but just so you can let them know, and then they can all leave. But yeah, I wish you all the very best. It's a really exciting time for everybody. So just bear in mind what we've said. But yeah, I wish you all the best of luck in finding your ideal roles.
So I've just posted it there, Kaylee. Sorry, I should have had that link ready so that you didn't have to wait for that. But the link there is linking to the newly registered nurse page, and the webinar. Certainly the first webinar is there around applying for and getting your first job as well. So certainly there's more information to look for there.
Amazing.
Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us tonight, and thank you, Leanne, for your expertise and support with this webinar. It's been gratefully
Thank you.
appreciated, and I hope everyone has found it useful. So
Lovely.
good night and good luck to everybody for such an exciting time.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you.